Okay, hi everyone. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 1 of Jekyll and Hyde. We've already looked at the contextual overview, looking at Victorian setting and also the upbringing of Stevenson and his experience in Edinburgh and the old and the new time. Today we're going to be looking at firstly the narrative style of Jekyll and Hyde just for a minute or so, and then we're going to be talking about the actual events that take place in chapter 1, which is entitled The Story of the Door. So first and foremost, it's important to note that the narrative style of the text is what's called an epistolary narrative. Basically that means that there's a combination of different types of text that are put in to the layout of the story. In some other epistolary narratives, you have examples of newspaper articles, you'll have letters, you'll have diary entries, and these all comprise to make the text more engaging and more realistic. In Jekyll and Hyde, it's a combination really of third-person narrative, told mainly from the viewpoint of Utterson, Gabriel Utterson, and then we have a series or a couple of letters or statements of the case which are written in first person. So for instance, Dr. Lanyon, which we'll encounter later, and the final chapter, which is Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case in his own first person letter style or narrative style. So this epistolary narrative, it's really just to try and make it a little more mysterious. It's almost like jigsaw pieces kind of being put together to create a full story, and that really adds to what really is a detective thriller. Jekyll and Hyde is science fiction. It also has elements of the Gothic, but it's a detective thriller as well. Moving on to the text, first things first, we're introduced to Gabriel Utterson and Richard Enfield. These two are described as distant cousins, good friends, and they go out a walk every Sunday evening. And it just so happens that this one walk this Sunday evening, they're having a conversation about a door. They pass by a door, and Richard Enfield has a story about that door. He starts describing the story, but the story isn't so much about the door as who he encounters that leads to the door. So he's talking about a story where he's out very late one night, and he doesn't explain why he's out late that night. He just kind of passes it off as being matter of fact, and he happens to witness something truly horrible. What he says he sees is a man trampling calmly over a child and leaving her screaming on the ground. A really clear quotation that you'll highlight and you'll come back to plenty of times in the future. And what happens is Enfield rushes across to check what's going on with this, as does the family of the child, and they accost the man as well as a Sawbones, which is basically a doctor, and he and the doctor force the man to eventually to pay them money from a cheque, and this cheque has the name of someone that Enfield doesn't want to discuss on it, which we later find out to be Dr. Jekyll, and eventually Hyde goes and has this cheque cashed at a bank, and he gives £100 to the family as almost kind of like recompense for what's happened. So Enfield tells this story to Utterson, Gabriel Utterson, and it's almost like a little bit of gossip that Enfield is kind of indulging in. In fact, even at the end, he says he feels ashamed for his long tongue, because as a respectable gentleman of Victorian era, he shouldn't be telling these stories. So this little chapter here, it's kind of like a tease as to the evil that Hyde is capable of. I mean, he's out very late at night, he runs down a side street and knocks a child to the ground and leaves her there screaming. He doesn't help her. And he's described as well quite a few times in this chapter as having a real effect on the people around him. So for instance, it says there was something downright displeasing, downright detestable about the man. He almost seems to have Satan's signature across his face. A lot of these little different descriptions of Hyde are really important. They link him immediately to this sense of Satan, the devil, evil, and there's also a couple of descriptions of him as being monstrous as well. Another very good quote which you'll know is that he was like some damned juggernaut. A juggernaut is basically a monstrous, powerful creature. So we have quite a few references to him almost being subhuman, of him not being something that's completely normal, and this is quite consistent throughout the text. So this chapter introduces us to all this. And at the end of the chapter, what's most important is Utterson wants to double check the name Mr. Hyde and says to Enfield, "Are you 100% sure that that's the name?" It's not clear at the end of this chapter why he wants to do this, but we find out that basically it's because Jekyll, who is Gabriel Utterson's client, and Gabriel Utterson is a lawyer, Jekyll has written in his will that if he were to disappear or die, then all of his estate, his property and his money would be left to an Edward Hyde. So now, you know, originally Gabriel Utterson just thought this was strange, but now he knows that this Hyde is an evil man because of the story from Enfield, so it sparks his curiosity and he wants to find out why his good friend Dr. Jekyll is a very upstanding, reputable Victorian gentleman, why he has any connection to this Mr. Hyde. And it starts really what is a detective story from his perspective. So that's chapter 1. Lots of different quotations and lots of different things to highlight. Make sure you read it very clearly, read it nice and carefully, and highlight anything especially that links to really the characterisation of Hyde, and especially Hyde's impact on people around him, because the evil force of Hyde is established early on, and it's really important you understand that. Next week we're moving on to chapter 2. Similar kind of thing. I'll start with a little description of what's going on in it, and then a summary of the events, trying to name some key quotes just from memory, and I'll put them underneath as well. Thanks.